Hello everyone, welcome into Fatty's Feast, where we make the best food you'll ever eat without leaving your backyard. My name is Josh. Today we're going to be cooking a pork butt, but instead of just throwing it on the smoker, we're going to be butterflying it to see how it affects the cooking process. Now, a pork butt, pork shoulder, same thing. It's one of the easiest, most forgiving pieces of meat you can smoke. That's why I always recommend beginners, if you want to smoke something for the first time, try a pork butt, you won't be disappointed. The prepping process is very minimal effort. You just make sure there's nothing gross on the thing that you don't want. You throw it on the smoker, you can run consistent temps for 8-9 hours, however long it takes, and then you're done. It's pretty easy. But today I wanted to try something a little bit different, and that's all thanks to Kevin's comment right here. He wanted to see if butterflying a pork butt would affect the bark, because more bark's always better, right? We love that bark. But also, will it affect the cooking time? Will it cut down the cook substantially? Now, I always recommend cooking a bone-in pork butt. The reason being, it's going to retain moisture, it's going to add flavor, and the cooking process will be simplified because you have that bone that's absorbing heat, and that'll ensure cooking of the middle of the pork butt. But what if you can't get a bone-in pork butt? Well, that's what we're using today. We're actually using a boneless pork butt, and as you can see, there's a huge gash in the middle. And luckily for this experiment, this is what Costco sells, so they're very easy to get if you have a Costco around you. I wouldn't take the bone out of a pork butt to do this experiment, but we're gonna do it with this bad boy. So this is what I hate about these things, is there's a big gash in the middle, and I found that when you just cook these like a normal pork butt, like they had a bone in, it doesn't cook correctly most of the time. Sometimes it's uneven, sometimes it takes way longer than it's supposed to, and it's because that bone makes a huge difference. But if we look at this thing, it's pre-butterflied already, so we're just gonna continue this cut. We have that beautiful fat cap on top here. I'm not gonna do much of that because I don't wanna ruin it, and it's holding the meat together. So we'll see how that affects the cook in the long run. So all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna come right in here, if I can, make this even as possible. And we're just gonna be very careful, doing very simple cuts. Come along the back here. Like I said, I'm not trying to break this thing in half or anything. So something like that, and we're going to push this in so it'll hold together, hopefully. But that's what we got to work with. Looking pretty good. If we flip it over, it's basically being held together right there. Got plenty of area there, so we should be pretty good. Now, as far as other trimming with this guy, I'm just sort of looking at this. I think that's gonna burn, so I'm gonna take that off. And that's the problem I have with these Costco pork butts, is sometimes they're just not butchered very well. I'll just take that fat off. And like I said, sometimes I do score the fat on top here. I'm not gonna do that in this case. I'm moving the camera in front here because I know the shadows are in the way. So we're gonna do meat side down. So we're just starting with our trusty old friend, yellow mustard, just as a binder. And a pork butt is a very flavorful piece of meat because of the fat content. So I'm just using my trusty old homemade brisket seasoning. Measurements are in the description if you want to check it out yourself. You can go as simple as salt and pepper with this. Like I said, this is my brisket seasoning, which is basically that. And we're going pretty liberal with this. Especially if you're not butterflying a pork butt, you can be very liberal with your rub. It's such a big piece of meat. That looks good. Flip it. Same thing here. Get all that goodness in. Can't forget about our sides. And now let's go across. Can already tell right here we're gonna have some pooling, so I might have to stick something underneath. But other than that, looks pretty damn good. Let's get her on the smoker. So I'm gonna put this end where there's that extra meat toward the fire. That'll just add a little bit more protection, not that I'm worried about it burning. And I'm gonna make sure this right here is sort of closed up, because that's where that fat's directly onto the grate. Put our probe in, shut her down. It's gorgeous out today, it really is. Sun's a little bright, so hopefully that doesn't affect the video, but it's a nice day. So like I said at the beginning, pork butts are very easy. You can just run them at 250, 275 the whole time and get a great product in the end. So I'm gonna start this like I always do with my pork butts. I'm gonna go around 250, get that smoke flavor. We're gonna let it go for about 3 hours before we check on it. I'm actually very curious how butterflying this pork butt's going to affect the cook, because in my experience, the boneless pork butts are not a quick cook. That lack of bone truly, in my opinion, affects the cooking in the center of the meat. And in my personal opinion, there's not enough bark on a pork butt, ever. I just can't have enough bark. I love that stuff. So we'll get this to 250, we'll let her go for 3 hours, and we'll come back and check in. And here we are after 3 hours. You can barely see this one with the lighting. There we go. It's looking good. All together, not bad so far. So I do notice some pooling up top here. I'm gonna have to take care of that. Fat hasn't really started to render on the top. Let's look at the bottom of this guy. That ain't looking bad at all. We do have some fat render on the bottom. That's looking pretty good. Look at these grill marks. I love that. Nice juices flowing out, but it's coming along pretty nicely. Not a lot of drying either, I've noticed. We'll put this guy right back here like so. I'm gonna put a piece of wood under here just to see if I can prevent some of this pooling. We'll just prop it up like that. It might work, it might not. If I go back to this one here, I do notice a little bit of drying. I might spray that in about an hour or so. So we've done a pretty good job adding smoke flavor. It was a little windy earlier, so that sort of made the fire a little bit dirty, but we've been hovering around the 250 mark. Now that we've got that smoke flavor added, I'm gonna put some more splits on because we're gonna bump the temps up and really form a nice bark. I'm gonna be looking to be around 275, 280, 290, somewhere around there. Now that might seem a little bit high. However, pork shoulders are big cuts of meat with a lot of fat, so we really want to get that fat rendered down. And because there's so much fat in this piece of meat, it's very hard to dry it out. So what I'm looking for is cooking the inside, rendering that fat, but also making a beautiful crusty bark on the outside. And one thing I'm really not sure of at the moment is whether or not I'm going to wrap. If I notice the outside's really drying out and I'm having a tough time maintaining a little bit of moisture, I might wrap it, but I'm not gonna know that until about maybe 2 hours from now. So far with the way this is going, I'm thinking this cook will probably take between 6 and 9 hours. Nice, right? But I really don't know. I've never cooked a pork butt this way. So we're just gonna have to wait and see. I'm gonna let these high temperatures go for about another hour. We'll come back and check in, take an internal temp, look at the bark, all that good stuff. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're 4.5 hours in. We're doing a great job maintaining our higher temperatures. The weather cleared up. It's no longer breezy, so I'm enjoying that. Right now, I wanna take a look at this thing, look at our bark, look at the internal temp, and we'll figure out what we're gonna do next. All right, still got some pooling on top. I'm gonna tip it off again. The wood's helping a little bit, but not that much. One thing I did notice is there's a lot of fat coming out of that grease stream. If we flip it up, bottom's still looking pretty good. Look at those juices oozing out. That's delicious. And even where I put that piece of wood, it's not that bad. Our bark is pretty set. I'm just gonna tip that up like so, because we can have this fat protecting the meat a little bit, and then hopefully this will drain off. But the fat's starting to render up top here. Bark is set. Still pretty raw over here. I shouldn't say raw, it's just not giving that much. Not too concerned about this crispiness up top. Everything's looking pretty ooh, got some juice that's coming out right there. That's nice. This looks like some beef ribs or something, just the way that this is butchered. That's sort of weird. We take some internal temps. Ooh, it's giving like butter already. 154. It's pretty solid right there. Solid meaning good. 168. Down in the back here. A little bit cooler, 147-ish. So this seems like it's cooking a little bit slower than this piece. So high 150s on this side and then high 140s on this side. So for 4.5 hours in, I'm not at all disappointed. That's pretty much where I thought we would be. With pork butts that I cook with the bone in, or even if they're boneless and I just cook them like a regular butt, usually by now I'd be around probably like 130, 140-ish, so we're not too far off. But with this guy being butterflied, I think we're gonna have a little bit better time getting this done at a reasonable hour. So my plan moving forward is I don't see any drying of any spots. I'm still trying to form a nice bark, so I'm not concerned about wrapping yet. I don't know if I'm going to wrap. We're just gonna maintain those higher temperatures around 275, 280, get a nice bark formed, and by that time, it might be time to take it off. Like I said, it's not gonna dry out, it's full of fat. We're gonna be in good shape. So I'm thinking another 2 hours, I'll bring you guys back to show you what kind of bark we're working with, and we'll figure out if we need to wrap. Maybe sooner, maybe later, I don't know. Okay, so we just hit the 6.5 hour mark. Still maintaining great higher temps around the 275, 280 mark. But one thing I've noticed as I've been temping this pork butt every hour or so, 45 minutes maybe, is that the side without the fat cap isn't cooking as quickly as the side with the fat cap. So let's walk over to the cooking chamber and I'll show you how I'm gonna solve that problem. All right, so we got beautiful bark formation. This fat is extremely rendered. Ooh, it's like jello, I love that. Over here, we're not giving it all because it's mostly just meat. So when I probe this, you'll see pretty high up in this spot, right? 190 something. Down here, a little bit lower, till we get to about right there. That's because this has been in the heat most of the time. And then back here, 168-ish, 167. So not too far off, but right here is really freaking solid. That's like 155. Let's tip this up, get those juices off. This feels really nice up here. I love that. And surprisingly, it's holding together pretty well. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw this guy right here. I'm gonna put the meatier part toward the fire. We're gonna try to tenderize this up a little bit. Still very juicy, really nice crust on this. That gives like butter. But looking around, we're in pretty damn good shape for the most part. And I'm just gonna keep this piece of wood out because I don't really need to worry about that anymore. Most of the juices come off. Now, as I said before, this is something I've never done before. This is a true experiment, so I don't know how this is gonna turn out. I'm hoping it turns out really great. Like I said, we're 6.5 hours in. This is about a 6 or 7 pound butt, I think. I can't remember correctly. So from what I've seen, we're sort of on pace for what I normally do. But thankfully, not much is drying out. I think we're gonna have a great product in the end if we keep doing what we're doing. The sun's in my eyes. I'm sorry if I'm squinting. I've been out here all day. I don't know what's going on. Notice I haven't sprayed yet. I just haven't seen any dry areas where I really think it's gonna get burnt. So I'm just leaving it alone. I am a little bit concerned moving it that way will cause me to spray because I think it might dry out. I'm not sure. It just doesn't have a lot of fat. So we'll see in a bit. But we'll probably let her go for another hour and a half and we might be ready to take her off. If something changes, I'll bring you back right away. Trust me. Okay, so I had a little bit of a change of heart. The bark looks amazing. We have a nice bark all the way around, even in the part that's not fatty. This is very spongy but crispy. Over here, still you push it, it gives like butter. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but it's nice and crispy, looks great. Ooh, that one's a little too buttery. But what I've noticed throughout this cook is the middle part, right about here, is just not getting up to temp. This area is pretty much done. And this is one of the issues I've seen so far with this cooking method is that one side is cooking a little faster than the other. We already sort of addressed that. I turned it to see if that would help. It's helped, but not as much as I'd like it to. So what we're doing is the foil boat method. Now, I don't use the foil boat method a lot, but we're gonna try it with this pork butt and see if it works. Also, I should mention, we just hit the 8-hour mark. So I'm just gonna roll this up. And all I did was spray a little bit of apple cider vinegar in there, not too much. And then to really keep all those juices in, I just doubled up the foil. And here we have it. That's how we're gonna put it back on. Now, unfortunately, I was sort of at the mercy of the Costco terrible butchering. So I couldn't really do much as far as cutting it the way I wanted to in the beginning. But if you can get a bone-in pork butt and wanna make your own cuts, it might work out a little better. I still prefer the bone-in method and just leaving it as is, but to each their own. Last time I tempted about 10 minutes ago, we were still at about 175 in the coldest part. The end there with all the fat was pretty much done, and then the front of the meaty section was also pretty much done. The one thing you want to keep in mind with pork butt is you definitely want to temp it. Temp is a very important factor in this, unlike with brisket. You want to make sure that the pork butt is up to a safe temperature, whereas with brisket, you're just looking for tenderness. Now, in this case, we're looking for both tenderness and temperature, but we want to make sure it's cooked up to that 200-ish degree mark. That being said, it could come in a little bit lower, it could come in higher, doesn't matter. It's about tenderness, but you do want to temp it. You don't want to just go off feel. Sun's going down out here. I want to give this like another hour. I think we'll be around the 9-hour mark. We should be good to go. Don't quote me. We'll see what happens. All right, now in total, this took about 10 hours. And you might be saying, well, that seems like a long time. But really, with the boneless pork butts I've made before, 10 hours is a pretty short time. Like I said, that bone really does make a difference when cooking a pork butt. I think it helps with the heat. So 10 hours, it's probably the shortest cook I've ever done with a pork butt. Now, the one thing I'm a little nervous about, this side, fall apart tender, because it had the fat on it. This side, not so much fat. Might be a little drier. I don't know. So let's try the side I'm a little more concerned about first. I mean, it's tender for sure. It just feels a little bit drier. So this bark looks amazing. It is a little bit drier. It's not bad. Not bad at all, actually. Just a tad bit drier than if you were to cook it all in one. Now let me get one of the fattier pieces here. That just falls apart. I love that. Now that's pretty good. Nice salty flavor. The fat is just, oh Lord. Just want to pull that apart. Just take a chunk out of this. That's pretty damn good. Two things I want to mention. I let this rest for about 45 minutes or so. You don't want to let a pork butt rest too long because it's pork. Same thing with like chicken. If it's a brisket, that's a totally different story. You can put it in the warming trays or in a cooler or whatever. Pork butt, I usually say max 2 hours if it's wrapped in foil. I just let this rest on my counter. You want to let it rest for at least 30 minutes, but if you're just doing it the way I did, no more than an hour. I'm sure some people are going to disagree with me on that. Food safety, that's my thing. I'm sort of a nut about that. The other thing I wanted to mention is what I just did there, pulling all of the pork apart. I know it's very appealing, but it's the same thing with like cutting a brisket. You don't really want to do that unless you know you're going to be serving it right then and there. As soon as you start pulling everything apart, everything is going to dry out. So I just did that for demonstration purposes, but if you're doing this in real life, and let's say it's just one of you eating by yourself and you just made a pork butt, don't shred the whole thing and then be like, oh shit. It's just gonna dry out. It's not gonna be very good at the end of the day, even when you reheat it. If you're gonna sauce it or something, that's one thing, but I just find it better to keep it all in one chunk, pull off the pieces you're gonna eat, and then put the rest in the refrigerator, and then you'll have a moist pork butt the next day. I try to do that with my briskets too. The chunks I don't want or the pieces I don't want, I just leave them intact, and then the next day they taste delicious, just like they're fresh. Not really, but close enough. But anyway, I've had some pretty terrible pork butt from some reputable restaurants, and this stuff is pretty damn good. Not bad at all. So, final thoughts. Would I do this again? I'll be very upfront with you guys. Obviously, cons, this side, a little bit drier. This side has more moisture, more fat, less fat. So, it's all right. But I think if I did it all together, it would be a little bit better. That being said, the pros with this, if you have a boneless butt, I don't see where you could go wrong, other than the fact you're gonna have a moist side and a dry side. Like I said, not that dry, but it's gonna be drier. Some guests actually like drier pork butt. It is what it is. That's fine. So you can have your guests choose between moister or drier, fat, less fat, just like you do with a brisket. Some people like point, some people like flat. It's all personal preference. The two very obvious cons for me is this saved time. I know I said it took 10 hours and that seems like a long time, but when I do a boneless butt, it takes 12 to 13 hours typically. So it shaved off 2 to 3 to even probably 4 hours. And also, there's so much more bark. You got more seasoning, more surface area, more bark. It came out very great. I also noticed that the foil boat on this didn't really make a huge difference with the bottom bark here. It's still pretty intact, I will say that. It's actually really hot. Jesus Christ. I just want to take a piece off here, see what it tastes like. Pretty damn good. And that's because it just bathed in its own juices. You gotta love it. So at the end of the day, yes, I would recommend doing this if you have a boneless butt, but I still swear by the bone-in butt method. I think you can't go wrong with that. If you're a huge bark fan, this might work out for you. Or if you like a less fatty pork butt, first question, why? I'm just kidding. But seriously, if you like to have the choice between drier or fattier, this might be for you. That being said, this will conclude this episode of Fatty's Feast. If you did indeed like what you saw, please smash that like button right down below. Get this content out to more people. It costs you absolutely nothing. And also leave a comment on things you want to see on my next video, on the smoker, on the grill. Doesn't matter, I'll do it all. Right over here, I'm going to put a video specifically designed for you. You're going to love it. And then smack dab over here, my smoker pork playlist. Hours of entertainment just for you. You'll learn a lot. If you like my diabetic, bearded, bald, average face so much, you can subscribe right in the middle. And until next time, everyone, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, and stay hungry.